Hi everybody, welcome back to Red Horse Ranch for another session on horse and human collaboration brought to you by the Red Horse Center for Collaborative Leadership. So today's session is called Lines of Communication, and the activity we're doing is line lunging. So for the last couple of episodes we worked on sending, we did some round pen lunging, we did some pasture sending, and today we're adding a long line to that, which means a rope or a long line connected to a halter, connected to the horse, and we're going to be working on that same idea of sending them in a circle. The guidelines we're working on today, or at least following, include the numbers game. That's evident in just about everything we do, but I think today will be a good illustration. That means we really want good experiences, and the desired action needs to outnumber any negative association with it or experience they may have had. So one of the things we're doing is we're adding a lot of, if we're doing this collaboratively and softly and along the lines of our principles and our guidelines and our methods, then we're adding a bunch of positive numbers to connecting to the horse with a tool, with a communication device. And that is the second guideline we're following today that is also usually there in abundance, and we've already talked about it in a previous session, which is communication informs all methods. Anytime you start adding a tool, especially one that can have physical impact or you're attaching yourself to the horse, it's very important to just remind yourself that this is a device of communication. This is a tool for me to send information through. And that puts you in an entirely different posture and perspective than I better get a rope so I can control this partner. You wouldn't really be partnering at that point. And also, like we've said before, it's sort of a losing proposition. If I have a strong, powerful 1,000-pound animal moving around in a circle, and I'm just trying to attach myself from a control point of view, I'm the one who's really at a disadvantage, and it's gonna, if I go that way, it's gonna require me to use leverage and energy and force that's no longer communicating what I want, and it's not a road to softness. So on the positive side, if we come in and we think, okay, this is transferring some of the other methods, some of the other things we communicated when we were free lunging through body language, and we started to lay in verbal cues. We taught that cluck was movement. We taught the belt buckle can provide direction and energy. Now we're just transferring that information, that language that we've already started to work on together, we're transferring that to other devices so that when we don't have the opportunity for body language, for instance, if we want to transfer to riding or driving or some other process, we're letting these other tools, the halter and the rope, represent other non-physical language that we've already established. So from a method point of view, a couple of things we're explaining or illustrating is fixed point versus fluid motion. You'll probably see both, and I'll end up talking about what I mean there, but I think it's important to determine when you're the fixed point and when you have room to move or provide softness. And by that I mean, if we're essentially trying to illustrate the circle of the round pen without a round pen. So I need to be the center. And so that means if I'm moving a lot, there's no fixed point, and it's not very defined. And if the rope is sliding between my hands, if it's changing lengths, then I'm not providing that clarity of request. So this comes into leading, and it comes into riding, and it comes into other things, is that we need to be very clear when we close our hand and say, this is the length that we're working with, this is the distance that I want between us, this is where I want you to go. That's the next method, which is a progression of precision. So we're getting more and more detailed as we go, and our decisions about when to be fluid and have flex and move with them and guide towards the desired specifics, and when to really crisp up the definition of what the specific is, that's a changing dynamic. And our awareness of, is my point moving and following, guiding, or am I defining it? Our awareness of that is where it all starts. So, and it bears mentioning, all of our methods and guidelines follow our core principles of choice, herd dynamics, respect, trust, mutual benefit, nonviolence, and softness. So today we're working with Sydney, who's been in the arena here for a few minutes. We've picked hooves, we kind of gathered and collected. She's gotten used to, it appears that she's pretty relaxed being outside of her normal herd. So I guess before collecting her, I'll talk briefly about the tools we have today. We're going to use the rope halter as we always do. In that, we have to be mindful is going to be communicating. Any tension, any bumps on the rope is going to be communicating through that. And so that's just good to be mindful of. We have two different long lines. I feel a little bit like Goldilocks on a bad day because neither of these are just right. I have one that's shorter than I like in here and one that's longer than I like. But I'm going to choose the longer one, which probably give me some opportunities to talk about how to manage the extra slack. And we're going to talk a little bit about technique in terms of managing rope. And there are choices there. We could do this in the round pen, which is right over there. We could do that to sort of have the round pen be a stronger guide for what we're shooting for. And then we're just kind of adding a little support and teaching that the rope is connected. And then here, sort of an extra step removed where we have a larger job in front of us as the leader to define the circle that we want. We do that by them learning where the end of that rope is. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then I have the lunge wand. So typically, I'll have that in one hand and the rope fixed point in the other. We'll go from there, but I'm going to start by just collecting Sydney. So I could start with a regular lead line, but I think I'm just going to bring the long line. We'll work on our approach and engage, or just be mindful of it, keeping our belt buckle off. I like to approach with things that I use frequently, like halters and ropes, in my hand instead of, I'm not trying to convince her we're not going to work. I'm trying to invite her to go to work softly. So I don't want to hide stuff or pretend I don't have it. And it's also really good practice. We talk about turning it off. Is that, another method coming up in a couple sessions is independence of limbs and actions. So I want to be able to act. I want to be able to communicate with my core and my eyes and my belt buckle and have my hand with the halter be independent of that and have it be off. So that when she says yes, I can then bring it in. But if you don't need to go further down into that other than that. We're not trying to hide anything. And if we teach them that saying yes to this stuff usually works out, not usually, it always works out. That's part of the numbers game. I'm just going to ask her to step away from the fence, but stay with. So these little requests before putting the halter on, part of this engagement process. And it's part of what makes the halter not be a bad thing, is that it doesn't go on when she's in flight mode or even just I'd rather eat mode. It goes on nicely after a yes. So by asking her away from the fence, and now asking her for a little movement. It's just a nice cup of coffee before the shift. So we're going to untangle this when we get up there. Now I'm going to do it right now. Here again, One might be moved to avoid doing all this movement near her, the sound of the line going through my gloves. I instead like to desensitize and get them used to it so that it's no big deal. Verbal, then support. So as always, this collection is part of the exercise. Oh. And that it lets us check in, see where she is. It lets them acclimate to the idea that we're going to do some work together. We're going to do some movement under request. So there's moments when you have a long line like this, you could think that if she moved off here, that could be a bit of a hassle to deal with. And on the other hand, I'd like to ground tie her so I can go get the wand, which is a tool that could create movement. So that's a judgment call that everybody's got to make. But we talk about wiping off the whiteboard. If I just thought, oh, her running with that long line would be bad, it's possible she would only hear running with the whiteboard or running with the line. So we want to erase that and think, I would like groundedness, I would like standing, I would like this soft comfort. And if I visualize that and believe that she's capable of it, she's capable of seeing the wand without moving. Even there, I said moving. Hey, Sydney, good. You called me on it. So if I want groundedness, I need to think groundedness. It'd be easy enough to just unhook. She's got pals. Could easily unhook or just do this over there. But I like to sort of take these opportunities. This will set us up. Instead of this being a distraction, it's actually us connecting before our activity. Oh. So she's capable of it. We had to believe, erase the chalkboard about what we didn't want to happen and think about what we did want. Focus. And she gave. I wasn't even on the lesson plan today, Sydney. So, we've talked about lunging from a free lunging point of view. When we start, we're going to get in position so that we can send, and that will include making sure her head's pointed the right way, her shoulder heads out versus coming towards, and then we move through the hind. So our belt buckle will be on the hind. If we're using a wand or a rope or something to twirl to create energy away from us and further behind them, we're going to do that on the hind side. And we didn't have a rope in free lunging, so we kind of had our left or our front side disengaged unless we wanted to tap the brakes. So what we're doing now is we're putting a line there, and I'll maybe illustrate that visually. Maybe I'll come this way. I'm going to lunge the other side from center when we start going, but this I think you'll help see it. So try and have her stay as a model. So I'm now center, rope is front, momentum is hind. I showed it and she moved, so she did the correct thing. You're correct, Sydney. We're just demonstrating though. And so I'm going to start that with a verbal cluck for movement. I can support with cues, but position and cluck. Cluck is movement, position is direction. Now this rope becomes communication of I can tap, which is what we use when leading for either slow down or stop. We talked about in the leading session, we talked about this joystick, and we want it to be able to be in neutral, left, right, reverse or brakes, forward. And when we're lunging, it's going to be kind of off to the side a little bit, but we still want to kind of have an implied neutral. Because here, this constant measured tension is defining where the circle is. This is providing direction. We do want them on a turn. So by it coming towards center, it's providing a slight turn, and we want them on a curve. And so if they come in, there's going to be too much slack, and we're going to need to send them out with energy towards their shoulder. If they go out, we can tap them back and say, I would like you to curve a little more, come back in. See, your head came towards me there? So this is providing more specifics regarding the nose, head, and shoulder, mostly the head, which informs the shoulder. It's providing more specifics, and it's giving us some breaks in our hand that we previously had just by a belt buckle. So if I'm riding or driving, I don't have an opportunity to get energy up front to slow down or to stop. I think what I wanted to say here is that it's also maybe interesting for some people the progression we're following, and that you might think, I'm going to start with a rope where I have more control. We'll get to that harder free lunging stuff later. To me, it's reverse. I want to start where we both have ultimate choice and we can get an understanding for what we're trying to do, what the words are. Now I'm just transferring that knowledge from some of the body language stuff and belt buckle stuff in free lunging. I'm transferring it to, I can say that with this too. That's why this is about communication, is I'm teaching her breaks. Now this horse, Sydney, knows this from leading and lunging, but they might know it from leading already, and now we're teaching it to them in another context, so we're supporting that language, which is why it's important that we're consistent with our imagery and our method. And so how I think about this halter and how I think about how I communicate with her is pretty consistent, even when certain things change. So my positioning here, the tension on this is different from leading, but it's not an entirely different language. We're essentially saying similar things in similar ways with a shift in context, and that's really how I like to learn, how I like people to teach me. And so that's what we're doing here. I think that's enough setup. I'm going to go on that side of Sydney, and I'm going to work on managing a circle where she kind of comes right through here. If a horse is particularly zoomy, and or if we have trouble getting settled into a circle, if we're being moved, either because we're choosing to be fluid to work out the specifics in it later, or if we're not paying attention, our circle may move and it may change in size, but our goal is a nice consistent circle with a fixed center. And we'll see how that develops. So again, I'll kind of coil this nicely. There are again, another reason I like this to be second is not only that language piece of how we're developing our cues and language with the horse, but if you're not comfortable sending a horse in a circle without being attached, I don't advise attaching yourself to them. Managing extra rope, they can only turn around We'll get to turnarounds in a minute. They have to turn towards the center in order to stay connected on the rope and change directions, where when free lunging, they can go either direction. So, pardon me, you have a lot less logistical challenges to the human, especially if they're on a learning curve, when you're not attached. It may seem nervous, it may seem counterintuitive to put yourself in a smaller round pen with a horse, but I think it's safer and kinder and more collaborative to work out your stuff before attaching. Now, we're here. I also want to, I think what made me think of that was safety-wise, I'm going to work to avoid wrapping this around your hand. I like a coil that's loose and I can leave it open. So if anything happens, if she took off, this would just run out of my hand instead of taking a finger with it. But we are going to have to manage lengths. So when I get her started, I'm going to have a shorter length, and then I'm going to let it out when we're at the desired width, which is I want her kind of just inside the left and right boundaries here of this arena, and that will kind of define where my center is so that I jog her right past our imagined line in front of the camera there. Again, this wand can be engaged softly, and it is supporting verbal cues and other momentum cues. All right, I think we're ready. Movement, direction. Now we'll let her out. I'm good with the walk to start. I could choose trot. Let's walk. Since we chose walk, I'm going to try to keep her in it. Let's walk. Let's walk. Let's walk, Sydney. Let's walk. And she's doing good at the trot. I just didn't. We're just going to worry about that later. We're going to trot. Again, I don't generally want her making pace decisions on her own, but 5 seconds in isn't necessarily when I want to get into dialing in too hard of specifics. Now, when she comes over here, this line is dragging, and when it's out here, it's at the right length. So this is part of being a fixed point. I don't want to collect all my rope there. I want her to go out, out. I want her to go out, and the rope will be right. And I'm using the left and right to determine out whether I have the right amount of rope. Out. And she's doing it consistently, and I want to stay on it. Out. But she's also doing well. She's got a nice steady pace. She's got a good attitude. So that was better. I don't have to get it all on one pass. And what I really like about thinking about this as being a fixed point is I'm not pulling her. If I do need to use it, I can use it softly with taps in support of other cues, which could start with belt buckle. Well, start verbal, then belt buckle. I gotta watch that I don't come to her shoulder. I'm paying attention to her head and her shoulder, so I started to creep. My belt buckle started to move towards her front third, and she started to slow down. So this is a series of wanting them out. We want them to migrate to our distance, our defined circle. One, we got to know where that is. Or they won't. And we got to not be changing it. So I want to stay in the center as much as possible. Now she had a funny little step over there, and she's shaking her head a couple times. I got to decide whether that's something like a stone in her foot or whether it's because that's where her buddies are. If you'll notice, when we get towards this upcoming fence, she pulls on the rope a little. Where I have to send her out there, here she usually asks for a little more rope, and I can choose to be fluid like that. Before I move my feet, I can flex. I can be the shock absorber, which either pulls in or lets out. Or I can notice that and kind of make sure that I'm firmly positioned. Now, if you're teaching a horse this and they aren't as accustomed to this, them finding the end of their rope doesn't feel this smooth and connected. It can feel like them running into something. And we might have to be a little more assertive, and we also might have to gradually progress that understanding and show them that this is comfortable, this is where the softness lives, and this is all part of being able to use something attached to their halter, whether it's for tying or whether it's for leading. If they can understand that to yield when they run into that tautness of the end of the rope, and that defines their area, it's really going to help the tool be softer, more communicative. I'm going to change direction, so I'm going to switch hands. Oops, I let a coil out. Position, head, shoulder, out, out. Hop. I lift the rope instead of changing the length. Here's another method, is to grab all of the rope to avoid the coil. Out, so she's come in, but I think my rope is good, so I'm not going to change the length of the rope right away. I'm going to change her distance. There, I have the trail in the sand to guide me. She didn't hit the fence. I could probably bring a little bit in or move towards that other fence. That's probably better. So I got a little off center. Okay, so now we're going to work on changing directions. We're going to borrow from everything we did free lunging, but we have extra business. I got to switch hands, and then I've got to take a position that closes the door for this direction and points her towards the other one. And then I cluck to keep movement going. It's important that she turn towards the center to go change directions so that my rope stays unencumbered, versus if she turned to the outside, I'd be wrapped around her. So if she turns her head towards the outside, or starts to, I need her to feel. It starts with just the resistance of feeling the end of the rope. Oh, it's easier, it's softer to go towards the center. If she's resistant to that idea, then I can tap. I can support what the rest of my visualization body language is saying with taps towards center. And when she moves her head, then I have access to suggest her shoulder go, and all that should feel softer than the alternative. So here we go. I switch hands. Close the door, head, shoulder, out. Now I'm raising my rope hand as a way of shortening it until we get back to the desired places. So I should be the right length because I didn't change anything about the length. And then I have her circle adjust to the rope instead of adjusting the rope. Now, we will need to adjust this from time to time, but we should start with as little fiddling as possible. That was pretty nice. So, out, out. So I want to manage my energy, my focus, stay on her hind third. We talked about transferring cues. So if I want to slow to a walk, if I didn't have the rope, I would move my belt buckle past in front of her shoulder after a verbal cue of whoa, and kind of stay with her to support that stop. Here I can add taps and tugs. Taps feels lighter to me. I can add that. If she doesn't know it yet, then she's associating it with slow down, and we're teaching that cue to the halter, which could later be a bridle. If she does know it, she still had an opportunity to stop on whoa. So that progression, starting with the subtlest cue, is always there. And it's either teaching language, supporting language, or rewarding softness. So that's why we always do it. Here, we'll go to a walk instead of a stop. Let's walk. Belt buckle, there. No rope needed. A little gas pedal, say we're still moving. That was very good. She's listening very closely. She's licking and chewing. She likes it. Oh. Now, on that one, I chose to show how light it can be. Good girl. I added a little jingle to the rope during the stop. I said, ho, I moved my belt buckle. I saw she was stopping, but I added just a little jingle, not because she needed it, but because I was associating it. That was an example of teaching the cue. When they're already doing it from our subtle cues and we want to transfer so that this also means that. That means when I don't have belt buckle, say I'm riding, I can say whoa and a little jingle, and she knows that that means stop. Really nice. We'll enjoy this break a little bit. We're going to change directions. Position, verbal. There she looked out. A little suggestion in. Here, we talked about this the other day. This is a good point to show this other trick. I'm going to take some rope up and I'm going to back up. Rather than trying to chase her to get to that outside shoulder, if I back up, she comes in on this radius. Once I see her outside eye, nope. So I can manage the rope. I'm going to back her up, get her coming towards center. There. Shoulder, hind. Then I return the rope to length. So if they are heading out, whether it's when you're trying to get started or change directions, and they start heading out the opposite way, the first thing to figure out is that you're trying to get to that outside shoulder to send it in. But if you can't get to it because they're moving away, if you pursue that, it can start to be a chase. And then pretty soon the horse is in the center, moving the human around in circles. I suppose that's still lunging, but the leadership gets flipped because they're lunging you. And the key to that is when you feel yourself wanting to head outside of your center, which we can do to some degree, but if you want to start taking more than a couple steps, change course and use your geometry to back up and get her heading in on a radius towards the center. And once you can see her outside eye, you can encourage her head. That will reveal the shoulder. You can send that in the direction you want to go. And then you move to hind for momentum. Okay, we're going to do a little lope here. So we're going to kiss instead of cluck and support if we need to. And here it's important to think about fixed point. We may need to manage for pace. We want contact, meaning we want to be able to, we want the rope off the dirt enough that we can feel we're connected, but we don't want tension. We're not trying to pull their nose in. We just want to guide them. We want to show them where it is, which is what all this set up. So fixed point doesn't have to mean hard, rigid point. We can have a little shock absorber in ourselves. We can be flexible. And then we also want to define that we're staying here in the center and she knows where the right length is, where it feels good. Okay, I lost focus there. And so she paused. Belt buckle's important. This is a good place to start. Those are supportive rhythmic cues to keep her up. Come on, hop. You got it. Come on. Hop. 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 Sydney, hop. 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 Let's go. Hop. Hop. Let's walk. Let's walk. Let's walk. So we lost the canter there for whatever reason. Could be first workout of the year sort of stuff. So instead of just hammering on that cue, I decided to get her to connect by doing something else, giving a different cue. Let's try. I'm going to manage my belt buckle, make sure I'm providing energy. Go for another departure and maybe a little shorter lope. Hop. Good. Let's try it. So there, it was important to recognize I wasn't trying to see how many laps I could do. I was trying to see if I could do them nicely until I released, and we did. She went just ahead of my cue to trot, but she went kind of when I thought trot. So I'm gonna call that tie goes to the horse. She was listening, and she gave me a lope after previously not doing so. Out. Get adjusted, get acclimated, get our distance right. I've changed my hand on the rope, by the way, since there's a lot of rope here. Normally that real loose ring and open hand to me is all right. But I think if you're shifting to something that's has potential to be a little more exciting, and if you're kind of past the adjustment side, and if you have a little adjustment with your own arm and movement, I can go to kind of a more fixed point, but my hand is entirely outside this bunch of rope, which will prevent coiling. Get a nice balanced trot here. Let's go. Hup. Hup. Come on, Sydney. Hup. 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 Let's go. Let's walk. Let's walk. So there's something there about returning to the canter. I was trying to lessen the amount of rhythmic cues I was providing, the supportive ones, that instead of saying go, like depart, they're saying you got it, keep going. And as I reduced that, she felt that reduction of energy and went into the trot. And similar to last time, she didn't go back to the canter under cue from cue after coming down. So we're just getting started and she's doing really well. So I'm not choosing, let's walk. I'm not choosing to really pick at that, and I'm instead resetting to do another clean departure instead of in the midst of that downshift. And I doubt that that's anything significant. If that showed up and kept showing up, I'd work on it. But we're both demonstrating long lining, and we're warming up with this horse in this season. And we're working on the numbers game. I want as many positives as I can get. And so I'm reapproaching to get a good departure versus demanding I get a departure in that moment where it wasn't readily available. That's another form of fixed point and fluid motion. I think we can be fluid and flexible in our requests. That's different than being lunged by them. We can stay in our leadership role of requesting movement and still accommodate a herd member, set them up, support them for success. Let's trot. Another thing that's important here, I think, is that even when we're reasserting those cues for the canter, or if we're having a hard time getting her into a trot, providing energy through the wand, through verbal, through body position, through movement, may be necessary, but we want to avoid chasing. Now, sometimes you have to move a little bit more than Sydney is requiring, and you do have to move with them to provide that energy to get them going. So moving along in a circle inside is not always wrong, and it's a subjective opinion, but you have to decide when you've been when you've tripped into chasing versus sending. And that's just a shift that's where the calm, confident energy leaves. That's where sort of the leadership and positive visualization. I've started to shift towards the camera there, so I'm recentering myself. And now we're going to go for another canter departure that's coming from this balanced, collected place versus where we were, which wasn't really out of balance except for the fact that she was not appearing ready for it. There we go. Let's go. Oh. Come on. I gotta watch my belt buckle. So now maybe instead of going to a walk, I'm just gonna get a collected trot. I don't love, I'm recognizing that I gave up on some cues there, which is the other side of the numbers game. I don't want to do that too often. But I'm just going to say, well, we don't need to go all the way back like we did last time. Let's just collect ourselves. I was actually thinking about whether I could describe the supportive cues while cantering. So I actually believe my focus shifted a little bit. May have contributed. But we're going to recenter. I'm going to talk about supportive cues. Let's trot. Oh, we're going to let her poop. Oh, let's walk. Let's walk. Oh. I can talk about supportive cues now or later. We'll give her a little break. So the cue to go, to do an action, needs to be repeated and escalated until the desired action. A supportive cue is done to provide consistent energy to keep them in that action. And so it's sort of a nuanced shift that if we understand it and we internalize it, it'll probably be expressed right. There's a different feel to keeping her in a pace, keeping her loping when I feel that if I let up energy, she's going to drop back. It's different. And one of the ways that I do it in this setting is I'm on her footfalls. So I'm choosing to kiss in rhythm with her gait. And then I can start lessening the frequency. So if it's every 4 steps, then I can go to every 8 to where I'm not doing it all. And my belt buckle is enough. But now all I'm going to do to kind of wrap up this session is I want to get back into a trot, back into a lope this direction. If we get a couple of good laps in, we're going to call it. So we're going to end on a good note. We're looking for that opportunity of a yes at cued request for canter. Let's trot. Oh, ha, oh, there you go. Even those verbal cues, we are increasing volume intensity. We can use sort of staccato syllables and increased volume. That's different than yelling at them. You know, it's sort of just a matter of perspective, matter of attitude. And it's really just an aspect of relationship. We kind of know the difference. Her eye there and her head was just a little bit out. I could tell she had something else on her mind. I was about to go and I could see she was still focused outside of us for a minute. So I just chose that not to be the opportune time. Let's trot. Let's trot. A little rope. There. I don't know if you saw that, but let's trot. I asked for the trot, then moved my belt buckle. She didn't go right away. Ha, ha, let's trot. And so I just sent a little wiggle down the rope, a little jangle. We're going to do it again here. That was the supportive cue. Verbal, body language, physical requests through the line of communication. So that both got it and taught it. And that's what we're always doing, even with the experienced horses. Now we'll do it at a walk. Let's walk, rope. Return to belt buckle. Cue that we're still moving. I'm intending for myself, my rope hand, and the length to continue to be relatively fixed. I don't want her collapsing in, coming towards me, just because we're at a walk, or trying to move me. And she might be curious there. She kind of looked in. She might be curious about whether we're stopping. Makes sense. We're approaching the end. She can tell. And we're still just saying, I'd like you to keep moving. Oh, that was too much. She trotted. A little rope. Let's walk. Now we're going to practice a stop. She heard me. Oh. Now where we would take the pressure off by walking away when we're not connected with the rope, here I can take the pressure off by keeping my belt buckle off and not coming directly at her. And then giving her freedom of choice. So now she's off, all the way off. I want to make sure she knows she's off, which I don't have to do by going towards her, but I'm just keeping the energy off. And then I'll walk away. That's Lines of Communication, part of the Horse and Human Collaboration series from Red Horse Center for Collaborative Leadership. This is Sydney. I'm Fred. Thanks for filming, Jenny. We'll see you all soon.